Hey there, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of The Cloud is Calling. We are officially here in season two, and I am super excited to be joined by my good friend, Steve Buchanan, who is a principal program manager at Microsoft, Pluralsight author, speaker, and former Microsoft MVP. And there's probably a lot of other titles that I could also throw in there, but I'm going to keep it a little bit short and sweet. Steve, it is fantastic to see you again, and really appreciate you coming and taking the time to be on the show. How are you, sir?
I am good. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me
Good.
on, Derek. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Most everyone, if they haven't taken a course on Pluralsight, which would be very strange, but hopefully the audience has or has not. But if they haven't, I will plug Steve for the first 2 seconds here. Please go check out his courses on Pluralsight. I promise you, you will not come across a better instructor than Steve around a multitude of things within cloud. And I want to use that as a segue to talk about uh, I think something that a lot of people hear out there in the community, and it's this future of multi-cloud, and it's this future of Kubernetes and containers, and we hear a lot about it. But I feel like when the actual coin the phrase right, rubber meets the road, organizations feel that that can be very daunting for them, and not everyone is confident in the skills that they have around that. What advice would you give an organization about that kind of cloud first approach?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very hot and relevant topic, and multi-cloud can be daunting, and it's not for every organization, right?
Hmm.
Um, Most organizations fall into multi-cloud because they were already using a cloud or a department was using a cloud, and then they decided as an organization to adopt cloud, and you see a lot of like cloud first. And a lot of times, what I've seen from being in the field is like when they decide to adopt a cloud, it's usually a different cloud than what the other teams were already
Yeah,
using. But when you make that decision, you can't always go to those departments or teams and say, okay, you can't use
rip
that.
it all out. Let's go. Yeah,
However, I have seen that. I've seen that. I've also seen where companies will acquire other companies,
yeah. Hmm.
and the company they acquired, they're already on a cloud, and they say, well, we're using this other cloud here. This is what we're standardized on. We need you to migrate, and so they'll do that, right?
Hmm.
Um, I've seen it the other way too, where it's like, okay, you keep your cloud, but we need to figure out how to manage this. We need to figure out how to centralize from a security standpoint and a bunch of other things, right? And so I think that's where the challenge comes in. No one's really created that tooling or tool stack that really gives an organization that perfect like management solution, like all
Hmm.
of solution for that multi-cloud management and brings you to that nirvana of like, okay, we have multi-clouds and yeah, this is just like managing a bunch of servers in our data centers. Like there's differences between the clouds, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
similarities, but at the API layer, there's differences.
Hmm.
And even if you bring in Kubernetes and you drop that in and you drop it in across all the clouds, unless you're rolling your own Kubernetes clusters, and even if you're doing that, right? Let's say you deploy Kubernetes clusters on VMs on each one of the clouds. There's going to be some differences at the VM layer and like the network layer and everything in the storage layer, right, across those clouds.
Yeah.
So even then, um, and I've also seen, and I've seen less of this now, but this misconception that like, okay, Terraform solves all of that.
Yeah. Hey, Terraform's the magical bullet, right? I can automate across multi-cloud. But I mean, and to your point, I've heard that from organizations, but the Terraform modules are all at different states of maturity with each cloud, and so I think realistically, organizations, right? That's kind of the end goal, is right. I can automate everything with Terraform or with Pulumi or one of those other tools, and the actual operationalization of that tends to be a struggle for them, and the skilling alone is a huge pillar that people struggle with because
Absolutely.
I feel like even though Terraform and other, those technologies have been around for a long time, there seems to be a finite group of people who have that skill set. And so when organizations look to do that, right, look to invest in that single tool, that single platform for operationalization, especially when it comes to cloud first, I, I mean, what skills should those organizations be investing in with their teams to help them, right? Is it Terraform? Is it just something broader? Right? What do you see?
I see Terraform being a part of that, and
Hmm.
quick shout out to Ned. If you don't know Ned, he's on
We all
Pluralsight.
love Ned.
He's
Yes.
like the Terraform guru. He's on Twitter and everything too.
He's
Go watch
on he's
his
on
stuff,
episode 6 of season 1. So yeah, go check it out.
and he's got a YouTube channel and
Yeah.
everything. So he drops Terraform nuggets all the time. He's got a Terraform book too. So, but I think Terraform is one of those things. I think from a cloud perspective, you need to really have a good understanding of networking.
Hmm.
And that might sound a little silly, like, okay, networking's been around forever. What? But
It's not
really,
traditional networking, right, though? Because cloud
right?
does it differently. And I
It
love having that conversation with people is what you learned in the early 2000s, right, when Cisco was huge and Juniper was huge. That's not how networking is done in the cloud today. It's very different. And so you kind of have to unlearn some things and then relearn different things.
absolutely, and there are a lot of skills that you might have if you've worked in networking for a long time, if you've been in that area, that still apply. Like
Yep.
you still need to map out IP schemas and manage IPs and do all of that. Um, where things start to get different is like now you're dealing with virtual networks and not physical networks, and you know,
Yeah.
it
Layer
in
one, layer two, gone.
yeah, and in Azure you have subnets and you have VNets, right?
Hmm.
And so the whole VLAN concept is different.
Very different.
And then if you go over to AWS, right, it's different. Like the terminology and some of the things, the way it works is slightly different. And same thing with GCP. And then if you have multi-cloud, are you going to have workloads siloed across those multiple clouds, or are you going to have those services talk across those multiple clouds, right? You
Hmm.
can have talk. And so do you have, these direct connections between the clouds? Like, do you have a direct connect um, in AWS? Do you have an express route in Azure, and do you connect those through an exchange, right? So you can have those services communicate across, and how do you secure those? And like, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to think about that are slightly different than what you're used to. But networking,
Hmm.
security, even if you're not a security person, you need to be thinking about security upfront with anything you do in cloud. And it makes your projects a lot easier, by the way, if you align with the security teams
Yep.
upfront and really go through the checklist and check the boxes and make sure your stuff is secure. Even when you're doing things like Terraform, even when you're doing things like Kubernetes, you still need to be thinking about security. um, so those things, and then automation, right? Pick your tooling, right? Terraform, a lot of the
Ansible,
cloud
Chef.
providers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's so many.
Pulumi you mentioned.
Yep. Plumi. Yep.
Now
Definitely.
we have Crossplane, right?
Crossplane. Yep. Hmm.
Which tips into the whole like platform engineering conversation.
Yep. I
Um,
was I was just chatting with my a fellow colleague about that is crossplane and the whole tipping into PE. So yeah, I mean automation feels like that's I feel like that's a run step for a lot of organizations, right? They've got to build to get there.
yeah,
Um, and so I guess that begs the question when it comes to cloud first and it comes to Kubernetes clusters and how you potentially integrate them or integrate cloud native services, uh, is that more developer focused or is it more like just general cloud focus, right? I always hear this term of like, oh, if you're looking to be cloud, you got to have these developer skills. But in reality, the cloud is, I think, a broader umbrella. So is it, or do we need to start reterming it more cloud skills, or is developer still relevant in having that conversation?
I've always liked the term of cloud ops because it was something new, and
Hmm.
you could lump like developer skills under that. I will say you do need some developer skills, and I've seen, you have a lot of folks out there that are working with cloud, or they're doing like their cloud native thing, and you have infrastructure people that need to pick up those developer skills. And what that really means is like, okay, you're going to do Terraform, so you're doing heavy automation, right? You
Hmm.
are coding out your environments and maybe the deployment of your applications, and maybe you're doing some cloud native stuff, so you're getting into Kubernetes, and now you're dealing with YAML files and all this stuff, right? You need to store that somewhere. So typically where you store that is in Git, and uh, common choice is GitHub, right?
Yep. Hmm.
So now you get into that. So now you need to understand GitHub, you need to understand Git, and traditionally those were developer skills. And so that's where a lot of those developer skills come into play, and understanding, continuous deployment is important. And so, yeah, you do need those developer skills. Now, on the flip side of that, I've seen some devs cross over into, DevOps. We'll throw that
Yep.
term out there,
Hmm.
or even cloud ops, and they have the developer skills, but they may not understand DNS down to a very deep level, right? And like,
Yep.
if you've been in infrastructure for a while, you've probably had to deal with DNS, and it's something you should like. It's a core skill that I think you should still have, even if you're working in cloud. DNS. Again, going back to the networking, understanding how that works, even storage, right? A lot of these skills that you needed before still apply. Um, I would even argue that, if you're working with something like platform engineering, and a lot of
Hmm.
people will probably throw food at me or something, vegetables
Uh-oh.
at me for saying this, but, um, you know, we had ITIL. ITIL's still around, I think, right? It's
Yeah.
still a thing.
V4, right? It's up to V4 now.
Yeah. So in ITIL, you had a concept of service catalog, right?
Yes. Hmm. Yeah.
So when I think about platform engineering and like internal developer portals, it doesn't sound that much different than service catalogs, right?
Yep.
But it's for developers. You're dealing with cloud native, and you're doing things in a slightly different way. But so a lot of those concepts still apply, but you need to put on that developer hat and just kind of understand things from their perspective. In fact, when I did my own transformation from, majority infrastructure guy, and really focused on in that system center world, into
Hmm.
like containers and Kubernetes and DevOps and all that, I really dove into all of the developer tooling. Like, I went and learned and started working with CI and CD, and even like testing, right?
Ooh, there you go.
And like, I'll be
You ran
honest,
some function tests and unit tests and
yeah, like unit tests, and you
yeah.
know, and I don't do much testing, right? I haven't really used
Hmm.
that realized that skill, but understanding that side of the fence, that side of the world, really was a precursor and really helped me as I got deeper into Kubernetes and got deeper into the cloud world. Then when it was like, okay, automate everything, code everything, it was not intimidating. And when it was like, okay, we need a tool to manage all of this code. We can't just have it in folders or directories,
No. Mm-mm.
right? Then it made it easier. And even like application performance monitoring, right?
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
was so valuable, diving into that. And I was doing some of that in the system center world too with SCOM, if you could even say that.
That's taking it back just a little bit.
It's
But it's
taking it,
still around, right?
we're going
Just
back. It's still out there.
still out there.
Um, but yeah, being able to, you know, see your applications and monitor the code and understanding what's going on in the code is huge. And even going back, to PowerShell too. PowerShell's still around.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, love
but,
PowerShell.
but that was another segue into this world that we live in today of doing everything as code. All
Hmm.
right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, as a Windows admin, man, if I wasn't PowerShelling some task of mine, right, it was an issue for me, and even still today, when I do setups, I still leverage some level of PowerShell within Azure, and it's just kind of part of your life in that regard. And to your point, it kind of helps springboard into that uh, world. So we've talked about kind of the future, right? It's multi-cloud, it's Kubernetes, it's containers. Organizations taking that cloud first approach. Here's where we want to invest. What sort of barriers, right, should organizations be looking for to help like clear the path, right? We want our dev teams, we want our ops teams, right? We want to start heading down this cloud first approach, and we want to pave the road, so to speak, right, to get them where they need to go. So, what sort of barriers do you think organizations should be focused on removing to make sure that they can get there?
For their people mostly, or
Yeah,
from
people process, man. People
people.
process technology.
Yeah. So this is gonna sound cliche, but invest in your people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, seriously, talk with your people, understand. There's a skills shortage, right? We
Hmm.
all know that. Um, and currently, like, there's a lot of talent in the pool right now with all these recent layoffs. But that's not gonna last forever, right? And
No.
even with that, like, there's a shortage, right? If we're talking about the future, right? Um, invest in your people, right? Go talk to your people, have those conversations, find out who's interested in cloud, who's interested in, AI's all the buzz right now.
Yeah,
Find out
Gen AI.
who might be interested in that, leveraging some AI technologies as you adopt cloud and make things easier. I'm thinking about things like GitHub Copilot, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Uh, your team should be using that tooling, and that will help them um, get to the
Yeah.
point where they're coding faster and writing better code and things like that. It's not a replacement for the humans. It's a it's more of an augmentation to help you do things more efficient and faster, right? So leverage like AI, right? But talk to your people and find out what they're interested in, and make sure you understand what they're doing today. Um, I know in the past, when I wanted to move to a certain area of technology, I'd start working on that on my own, right?
Yep. Hmm.
And sometimes my management at the time would know that I'm doing that, and sometimes they wouldn't, and I'd be doing it anyway. And so I think management, you need to go have conversations with your people, because if you have someone on your team and they got a lab at home or they got a lab in cloud and they've terraformed the whole thing out, and you're not using Terraform at the company, well, guess what? They got the skills.
Yeah,
You need
you're
to find you
wasting
need to find
skills.
out you need to find out if they have the skills, right? If they have the skills, guess what? Um, maybe you don't need to send them the training. Maybe you
Yeah.
need to, sign up for a Pluralsight account, shameless plug, and
Yeah. Yeah.
let them go take Ned's course just to fill the gaps where they might have some gaps around that Terraform or Pulumi or whatever it might be that you're adopting, right?
Hmm.
But it's talking with your people, knowing your people, skilling them up. Start there, and then of course go out in the market and find talent where you can't build that up in house. Um, and then, as far as adopting cloud, the cloud projects I've seen be really successful is you designate a team to, like, be the cloud ops team.
Almost like a tiger team,
Yeah,
right?
like a
Yeah.
type of team, like, okay, this is your job. You're gonna focus on this, right? And
Hmm.
they to dig in and find out what the pitfalls are that you might run into, and they understand your organization, right? Hopefully, these are people that have worked at your org. It's good to pull in people that are new to your organization as well, because they'll bring fresh ideas. I would even argue plug in some consultants, right?
Yeah.
Plug for Avanade and Accenture and the Deloitte's out there in the world. Like they got some really talented people there, and even like smaller consultancies out there.
Mhm.
Uh, plug in some outside folks into your cloud ops groups, your Tiger team, whatever you want to call it, and everyone's going to bring a different perspective. Those consultants have probably done 20 cloud projects, but they don't understand your organization and haven't worked there for years, right?
Yeah.
So you've
They have an
had,
idea of the industry, right? What your
you know,
competition might be doing, right? What
yeah.
the others in your space might be doing, but yeah, they don't know you.
So
So yeah.
pull those teams together, make sure they have the resources they need, make sure they have buy-in from leadership. So when they do hit those roadblocks, that those can be removed. I would argue put a security person on that team. If you have developers in house, plug someone from the devs in on that team, or at least invite those folks to meetings with that team. Networking, put someone from the networking team in that cloud ops. Like you got to build that out with a certain skill set, and you can't expect one guy or one lady to have all
Carry
of
everything.
the
Yeah.
sets. Yeah,
Yeah. Can't
so
unicorns are hard to find, and
they are.
they're very hard. All right, Steve. Before I let you go, because this topic is near and dear at heart, I'm going to flip the table a little bit. You and I have both kind of come up through the ranks, and one topic that I know you and I have chatted about a lot is personal branding, right? And we've talked about people getting those skills and kind of making a name for yourself. That's something that's a struggle for a lot of people, right? It was a struggle for you, it was a struggle for me. There's a lot of anxiety around social media and putting yourself out there. So what are some of the things that you tell people, you give advice about, for them either looking to break into that first IT role or moving higher up, right? Advancing your career, getting those additional skill sets that can really help distinguish them, right? What does a personal brand do for them?
Yeah, so from a personal brand perspective, well, anyone that wants to break into IT, like I'll say, make sure you're persistent, right? It took me a while to really break into IT to the level of where I wanted to get to.
Hmm.
And I sort of stumbled into tech, but um, it can be a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you really have to be persistent, and at some point the right door is going to open for you, and you'll start heading down the path that you really really want to get down. But if you give up before that door opens, like it's a wrap.
Yeah.
Right? So be persistent. There's plenty of opportunity out here for all of us, and so that door will open. Once you get into tech, the advice I give folks, and not everyone will agree with this, but I like to say go wide and then go narrow. And the reason I say that is because when you go wide, you can really pick up the foundational skills that I think everyone should have, right?
Hmm.
Things like how does DNS work? How does networking work? The OSI model, like
Go
really,
wide. Go wide on the foundations, right?
yeah,
Understand like
or
databases,
like that, yeah.
basic developer skills. Yeah.
Like, I remember back to setting up Active Directory and building domains. Like, this is a long time ago, and I have no desire to go back and do any of that. But
You're not signing up to clean up an Active Directory.
no, with understanding how LDAP works, like
Yeah.
I've had to deploy applications or configure things where I got to connect to LDAP, and having those skills in the past have helped. Working
Yep.
with databases, like foundational skills are going to help you when you narrow in and become a specialist. And so I say narrow in because become a specialist, because that's where the money gets good.
Yep.
That's where you really can start to build your brand around something. And also, a good friend of mine, Sam Ernskine, always reminds me, like, don't ever get tied to the technology, right?
because it changes.
It changes. And
Yeah.
so, narrow scope down, uh, focus on a technology, specialize in that, and that's going to do wonders for you. You can build a brand around that, but don't build your entire brand around that, and don't build yourself into a spot where you can't pivot, right?
Yeah.
Because you will need to pivot at some point. And so those foundational skills, again, going wide is going to help you with that pivot. If you have enough variety of skills to kind of do that. As far as like, not everyone wants to do what we're doing right now, right? Not everyone
Yeah.
wants to be on a podcast. Not everyone,
It's scary. And how many people, I always tell them, like, they're I'll hear feedback, "Oh, you just look so calm, you look so thing." And I'm like, half the time I'm terrified. Like, it's even for people who do it all the time. It never goes away, that feeling
right?
of nervousness, anxiety. We just have mastered how to either cope with it or suppress it in a way to where we can focus and deliver, what we need to do. And that takes time,
Uh,
that takes practice. um and there's good strategies that you could recommend, that I can recommend, but ultimately you have to do what works for you. Like, what works for me, um I have a great playlist on Spotify. I jam it up before I go out and do a big talk, at maybe a major conference, right? I listen to some music to kind of help narrow me down. And I treat the audience as I'm just speaking to a bunch of friends, right?
that's
I demystify just kind of the magnitude of it. And if it's like I'm talking to you, or I'm talking to others in the cloud community, we've talked about Ned and other colleagues of yours like Thomas Maurer and others. Like, if I'm just feel like I'm having a conversation with them, like, there could be 5,000 people out there, I could care less.
absolutely.
Um, so
That's really key.
yeah.
And I think it's important to call out too that you can build a brand like externally, kind of what we're doing here,
Hmm.
and what we've done, and you can build a brand. I don't know if internally is the right term for it, but you should build a brand
Build a
in,
presence.
yeah, build a brand and a presence in your space, right? Like, if you're at a company and you're looking for a new role, like, having that brand is going to help you land that new role. Even if you're not speaking at conferences and stuff, you still want to be able to walk into an interview and people know who you are. Like, oh, you're the Terraform person, or you're
Yep.
the you're the Kubernetes person, right? Like, you know your stuff. You want to
Yeah.
have a brand that precedes you in the way that you really know your stuff, even if you're not out there speaking at conferences and doing books and things like that. And so, building a brand is really important, in the job world today.
No, definitely is. Well, Steve, I greatly appreciate you coming on. Fantastic to chat with you as always. And I look forward to when we can see each other again in person, because I think it's been ages, at least it feels like at this point. Uh, so, but thank you for taking the time out of the day to do this. I greatly appreciate it. Any final words before we head out on this episode?
Just, for anyone that's out there in the tech space and you are thinking about building a brand, just get started. Mm, the tech communities are very welcoming. You know, Even, folks like Derek reach out to him like, "Hey, I'd love to be a guest on your show. If you have questions or anything, reach out to
I
me."
am happy to do some
It's getting
training.
started.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for today's episode. I greatly appreciate it. And make sure to tune in to the rest of season 2. We got a lot more great guests lined up for you, and looking forward to hearing more and sharing more out there. And Steve, thanks again. Really appreciate it. And folks, just remember, the cloud is calling.
Thanks, Derek.